It's 1959, and the automotive world is about to witness something remarkable. A small British manufacturer, the Roodst Group, is preparing to unveil a sports car that will challenge everything Detroit believes about the segment. Not with brute horsepower or excessive chrome, but with something the Americans had gradually forgotten in their pursuit of size and luxury, genuine driving pleasure, wrapped in elegant simplicity. You remember those years, don't you? Dwight Eisenhower sat in the White House, and American automobiles had become floating palaces on wheels. The 1959 Cadillac stretched over 18 feet long, wearing fins that reached toward the heavens. Power steering, power brakes, and automatic transmissions were rapidly becoming standard equipment. The average American car weighed well over 4,000 pounds. Comfort was king, and nobody seemed to question it. But beneath this chrome-plated conformity, something was stirring. A small but growing number of American drivers, men who'd perhaps driven British sports cars during the war, were hungry for something different. They wanted a car that communicated through the steering wheel, a car where driving was an active pursuit rather than a passive experience. William Edward Routes created first Baron Routes in January of 1959 for his services to the motor industry, saw this opportunity clearly. He'd built the Roodst Group into one of Britain's major automotive manufacturers. The company desperately needed export dollars, and America represented the golden market. MG had proven there was substantial appetite. They'd sold tens of thousands of sports cars to Americans. Jaguar's XK120 had buyers drooling. Austin Healey was making serious inroads. But Lord Routes wanted something different. He didn't want another uncomfortable sports car. He'd instructed his team to create something refined and civilized. A car you could drive across the continent in comfort, yet one that still provided sporting performance, wind-up windows instead of side curtains, a proper convertible top that actually kept out the rain, interior trim that wouldn't embarrass you at a country club. The styling fell to Kenneth Howes, a designer with impressive credentials. Howes had started as an apprentice in the Great Western Railway's locomotive workshops, then moved to Raymond Loewy's office in London. He'd transferred to Loewy's New York studio in 1952, working on Studebakers. From there, he'd moved to Ford's styling center in Detroit, where he actually worked on the early Thunderbird project. When Howes returned to Britain in 1956 to join Routes, he brought invaluable understanding of American taste. He knew what Americans wanted because he'd been living and working in Detroit. Together with Jeff Crompton, Howes created something special. According to Ted White, head of Routes styling, Howes contributed approximately 80% of the overall design work. The brief was challenging: create a sports car for America using existing Routes components. They started with a modified Hillman Husky floor pan. Running gear came from the Sunbeam Rapier, upgraded with front disc brakes. By December 1957, Howes had a full-scale wooden mock-up painted in carnival red. When Lord Routes and his brother Sir Reginald saw it, they were immediately impressed. The Alpine's long hood, short deck, and clean flanks hit exactly the right note. When the Sunbeam Alpine Series 1 debuted at the 1959 London Motor Show, it represented Lord Routes' vision made real. Motorsport magazine praised how Routes had created sporting versions only when underlying models reached necessary efficiency levels. For a brief moment, it looked like Routes had cracked the code European sophistication at a Chevrolet price point. But timing is everything in business. While the Alpine seemed perfectly positioned, forces were gathering that would undermine everything. Corporate politics, changing market dynamics, and one fateful decision to create a Vate variant would turn the Alpine story from triumph to tragedy. What should have been lasting success became one of automotive history's most fascinating what-if stories, a brilliant car that shocked the industry, then vanished almost overnight. Section 1. The British Invasion. Before the British Invasion, when the Alpine Series 1 entered production in October 1959, Britain was rebuilding from war. The motor industry had become one of the nation's brightest hopes. The country desperately needed export dollars, and America represented the promised land, a massive market with growing prosperity and emerging appetite for European sports cars. The numbers tell the story. MG had sold approximately 40,000 TCs, TDs, and TFs to Americans by the mid-50s. These were crude cars' side curtains, minimal weather protection, harsh suspensions, but Americans bought them anyway. Jaguar's XK120, despite being expensive, had Americans lining up. Austin Healey was making inroads with the 100 and 100-6 models. Lord Rootes understood something crucial. Not every sports car buyer wanted a racing car for the road. There was a market for drivers who wanted sporting character without suffering. Men who'd driven sports cars in youth but now had families and careers. Buyers who wanted something more engaging than a Chevrolet, but more civilized than an MGA. The Alpine wasn't trying to be hairy-chested like an Austin Healey. According to contemporary reports in The Motor and Autocar, the design brief specifically called for continental touring comfort with sporting performance, proper wind-up windows, not flapping side curtains, a real convertible top that sealed against weather. These weren't revolutionary features, but they were unusual in a British sports car at this price point. Kenneth House's styling captured this dual character perfectly. The long hood and short deck signaled performance. Clean flanks spoke of European sophistication, but those pronounced rear fins? Pure American influence, a nod to the market Rootes hoped would provide majority sales. The Alpine looked fast, standing still, but wasn't aggressive or intimidating. The decision to use existing Rootes components was purely practical. Developing an entirely new platform would have been prohibitively expensive. So the Alpine rode on a modified Hillman Husky floor pan. The engine came from the Sunbeam Rapier, but despite these humble origins, the result felt cohesive and purpose-built. House and his team had performed genuine alchemy. Until 1962, Armstrong Siddeley actually assembled the Alpine for Rootes. The company didn't have spare capacity, and Armstrong Siddeley had expertise and available space. This pragmatic, cost-conscious approach characterized the entire Alpine project. Section 2. The engineering reality. Now let's talk about what was under that bonnet. The Series 1 used a 1,494 cubic centimeter inline four-cylinder engine, essentially a bored and stroked Hillman Minx unit. It produced 78 horsepower at 5,300 revolutions per minute. In an era when American V8s made 300 horsepower, 78 sounds modest. But the entire car weighed approximately 2,000 pounds. The power-to-weight ratio was respectable for the class. The Motor magazine tested a Series 1 with overdrive in 1959. Their test car recorded 99.5 miles per hour top speed and 0 to 60 in 13.6 seconds. Not blistering, but adequate. More importantly, these numbers came from a car you could live with daily. The 4-speed manual featured full synchromesh on all forward gears, genuine luxury in 1959, when many sports cars required double clutching for first gear. An optional overdrive unit made the Alpine a relaxed highway cruiser. Many American buyers specified this. Understanding American driving involved long distances at sustained speeds. The steering was rack and pinion, beautifully direct and communicative. You pointed the Alpine where you wanted to go, and it went there. No vagueness, no delay. This was one of the car's greatest strengths. It felt alive and connected in ways that even much more powerful American cars couldn't match. Front suspension used coil springs and an anti-roll bar. The rear retained a traditional live axle with semi-elliptic leaf springs, nothing sophisticated, but adequate for this weight and power. Suspension tuning struck reasonable balance between comfort and control, firm by American standards, but not punishing. Braking came from Girling, 9.5-inch discs at the front and 9-inch drums at the rear. Front disc brakes were still uncommon in 1959. Contemporary testers found braking adequate, if not inspiring. The discs provided fade-free, stopping that drums couldn't match. But here's what mattered. It all worked together harmoniously. The engine was willing and smooth. The gearbox was pleasant to use, the steering was communicative. Nothing was exceptional in isolation, but the sum was greater than the parts. You sat low, behind that thin-rimmed wheel, and felt connected to the machine in ways a Thunderbird or even a Corvette couldn't provide. Section 3. The American Gambit and Evolution. Roots priced the Alpine Series 1 at approximately $2,695 for the 1960 model year. Context: a base Corvette listed at $3,872. An Austin Healey 3000 cost around $3,095. An MGA ran approximately $2,300. The Alpine slotted perfectly into the middle, more than basic British sports cars, but undercutting established players. Marketing was clever. Roadsters positioned the Alpine as the civilized sports car, emphasizing wind-up windows, proper convertible top, decent luggage space. Advertisements in Road and Track and Sports Car Illustrated showed well-dressed couples at elegant destinations. This wasn't a car for weekend racers. This was transportation for people with taste and sophistication. And for a while, it worked. According to Sunbeam Alpine Owners Club records, Roots built 11,904 Series 1 Alpines between October 1959 and 1960. A significant portion came to America. Dealers reported strong interest. Road and Track tested one in May 1960 and praised its refinement. Sports Car Illustrated called it a thinking man's sports car. The Alpine found its audience among exactly the buyers Rooties targeted. Successful professionals wanting something more engaging than their sedan, but more comfortable than traditional sports cars. Doctors bought them. Lawyers bought them. Business owners bought them. James Bond drove a light blue Alpine Series 2 in 1962's Dr. No, the very first Bond film. Tremendous publicity, associating the Alpine with sophistication and adventure. This pop culture presence raised the car's profile immensely. The Series 2 arrived for 1961 with meaningful improvements. Engine capacity increased to 1,592 cubic centimeters. Power rose to 80 horsepower. More significantly, Roots revised rear suspension geometry to reduce the Series 1's oversteer tendency, a characteristic that had made early cars exciting but occasionally alarming. The Series 3, introduced at the March 1963 Geneva Motor Show, brought further refinements. A new cylinder head design bumped power to 83 horsepower. Interior received upgraded trim. Quarter lights appeared in front doors. Most visibly, the Alpine adopted distinctive tail fins, curious for 1963 when Americans were abandoning fins, but it worked, giving the Alpine recognizable profile. Then came the Series 4 in 1964, with capacity increased to 1,725 cubic centimeters and 92 horsepower. This was the Alpine as it should have been from the start, genuinely quick, with 0 to 60 below 12 seconds and top speed approaching 110 miles per hour. The upgraded engine brought 5 main bearings instead of 3, making it more durable and smoother. Sports Car Graphic tested a Series 4 and declared it a proper GT car in miniature. Car and Driver noted, "The Alpine has matured into exactly what Lord Roots intended, a sports car you could live with every day." These weren't grudging compliments. These were genuine endorsements of the Alpine's philosophy. The Series 5, introduced in 1965, represented the Alpine's culmination. The engine was thoroughly revised with new 5-bearing bottom end, breathing through twin Zenith Stromberg carburetors. Power reached 93 horsepower. The car now had an alternator as standard. This final version represented the Alpine at its best: refined, reasonably quick, well-built, attractively priced. Section 4. The Tiger's Shadow. But in 1964, Rooties did something simultaneously brilliant and self-destructive. They created the Sunbeam Tiger. The story began in 1962 when Australian racing driver Jack Brabham suggested to Norman Garrard, Rooties' competition manager, that they should drop an American Vate into the Alpine. Garrard knew Carroll Shelby, who'd already performed similar surgery on the AC Ace, creating the legendary Cobra. Shelby was interested. He and engineer Ken Miles created prototypes using Ford's 260 cubic inch V8. The fit was incredibly tight. According to Shelby himself, if the figure of speech about the shoehorn ever applied to anything, it surely did to the tight squeak in getting that 260 Ford mill into the Sunbeam engine compartment, but it fit. Barely. The result was extraordinary. The Tiger produced 164 horsepower, more than double the Alpine's output. Weight increased by only about 20%. 0 to 60 dropped to under 9 seconds. Top speed approached 120 miles per hour. This was a legitimate performance car that could run with Corvettes at substantially less cost. The Tiger debuted at the April 1964 New York Motor Show. Automotive journalists went wild. Road and Track called it a giant killer. Car and Driver said it offered Cobra performance at Corvair prices. Orders flooded in. But here's the problem. In showrooms, sitting side by side, the Alpine suddenly looked anemic. Why buy the 78 horsepower four-cylinder when, for about $600 more, you could have a V8 making twice the power? The logic was inescapable. The Tiger didn't complement the Alpine, it cannibalized it. Production numbers tell the story. Roots built 7,083 Tigers between 1964 and 1967. In those same years, Alpine production remained steady but never grew as hoped. The Series 5 managed 19,570 units over 3 years, respectable, but nowhere near volumes Rooties needed for genuine profitability. The Alpine had become simply the car you bought if you couldn't afford a Tiger. Section 5. The Chrysler Takeover and Final Days. In 1964, Rooters Group was struggling financially. The Alpine program wasn't generating hoped-for profits. Development costs for both Alpine and Tiger had been substantial. Labor problems had resulted in crippling strikes. The company had also committed to developing the Hillman Imp, requiring an entirely new factory. Financial strain was unsustainable. Chrysler Corporation, looking to expand internationally, began acquiring Rooties shares. By 1967, Chrysler controlled the company completely. Lord Rooties had died in December 1964, never seeing the final outcome. His son, William Jeffrey, became second Baron Rooties and chairman, but real control resided with Chrysler. Here's where it gets messy. The Tiger used a Ford engine. Chrysler had no interest whatsoever in building cars powered by its arch-rivals' power plants. Chrysler immediately killed the Tiger program. Only 633 Mark II Tigers were built before Chrysler pulled the plug. But Chrysler also had little interest in the Alpine. Their strategy focused on volume, sedans, practical, profitable cars like the Hillman Avenger. Sports cars were niche products with low volumes and marginal profitability. Chrysler saw no compelling reason to invest in continuing Alpine development. The sports car market was changing rapidly. By 1967, Japanese manufacturers were arriving with increasingly credible products. Datsun's Fairlady Roadster was making noise. Even MG was struggling to adapt to changing American safety and emissions regulations that would soon make traditional British sports cars nearly impossible to sell profitably. The last Sunbeam Alpine Series 5 rolled off the line in 1968. Total production across all 5 series reached approximately 69,700 units, not terrible, but far short of the 100,000 Roots had hoped would establish the Alpine as a permanent fixture. What killed the Alpine wasn't any single factor. The Tiger cannibalized sales. Chrysler had different priorities and no interest in supporting a niche product. Changing American regulations were making traditional sports cars increasingly difficult to certify. The MGB just kept selling, benefiting from economies of scale, and a massive dealer network Rooties could never match. But there's also this. The Alpine was almost too refined for its own good. Sports car buyers in the 60s increasingly wanted extremes. Raw performance, Cobras, Corvettes, or genuine luxury, meaning Porsche or Jaguar territory. The Alpine occupied uncomfortable middle ground, too civilized for the performance crowd, not luxurious enough to compete with genuine grand touring cars. Section 6. Legacy and Value. So, what became of these cars? Many rusted away, victims of British build quality and harsh reality that sports cars live hard lives. Some were converted to Tigers, sacrilege to purists, but understandable given the performance gap. A few dedicated owners maintained them carefully through decades. Today's collector market tells an interesting story. According to Hagerty valuation data, a Series 1 Alpine in good condition might bring $12,800. In excellent condition, values reach approximately $26,900. Prices remain remarkably similar across all 5 series. These aren't astronomical figures. An MGB in similar condition commands comparable money. The Alpine never became the investment piece that Cobras or early Corvettes did, but values have remained stable, and a small dedicated community maintains these cars. The Tiger commands substantially more, often $60,000 or more for excellent examples, with particularly desirable early cars exceeding $100,000. The market has spoken. Weight performance trumps 4-cylinder refinement, even decades later. But monetary value isn't everything, is it? Those of us who remember driving Alpines, who've experienced that precise steering, that willing engine, that connection between driver and machine, know what the market sometimes forgets. These were beautifully balanced, wonderfully responsive machines that rewarded skilled driving. They weren't the fastest or most powerful, but they were engaging in ways many flashier cars weren't. The Alpine represented a road not taken in sports car development. It proved you could build a civilized, comfortable sports car without sacrificing fundamental driving joy. It showed sophistication and sporting character weren't mutually exclusive. In many ways, it anticipated the modern sports car, comfortable, well-equipped, refined, yet still engaging. The Alpine was simply 30 years ahead of its time. The Sunbeam Alpine should have been a lasting success story. It had the right formula: attractive styling, courtesy of Kenneth Howe's talented hand, decent performance that improved steadily, reasonable pricing undercutting expensive competitors, and genuine refinement, setting it apart from cruder rivals. For a few bright years in the early 60s, it looked like Roadsters had cracked the code, building a sports car that could compete with Detroit's best while offering something uniquely British. But timing, corporate politics, and relentless market forces conspired against it. The Tiger's arrival in 1964 undermined the Alpine's carefully crafted positioning. Chrysler's takeover in 1967 ended any hope of long-term development. Changing American regulations and emerging Japanese competition made the traditional British sports car formula increasingly untenable. By 1968, barely a decade after debut, the game was over. What remains is a fascinating what-if story, and several thousand survivors that still remind us what might have been. The Alpine shocked Detroit by proving a small British manufacturer could build a genuinely appealing, well-refined sports car at competitive price. It disappeared overnight because business is brutal, timing is everything, and sometimes even good cars fail when circumstances turn against them. If you owned an Alpine, if you remember threading one through winding country roads, feeling that communicative steering, and hearing that eager 4-cylinder sing, share your stories in the comments below. Tell us about the Alpine you owned, the adventures you had, the memories you made. These cars deserve to be remembered as more than footnotes in automotive history. They were, for a brief and shining moment, exactly what sports cars should be: engaging, beautiful, refined, and genuinely fun to drive. Don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into automotive history's most fascinating stories. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this journey back to a time when British sports cars ruled American roads, when Lord Roots dared to challenge Detroit, and when a car called the Alpine promised to change everything. And remember, sometimes the cars that disappeared are the ones worth remembering most. Thanks for watching.